The air war over Europe was supposed to be a numbers game: altitude, formations, escort ratios, loss percentages. But in early 1944, high above Germany, the statistics bent around a single man in the most exposed seat of a bomber. For 4 minutes, one tailgun would turn defense into offense, and every gunner in the 8th Air Force would be forced to rethink what it meant to stay alive. March 6, 1944, 23,000 feet above Germany, a B-7 flying fortress called Hell's Fury pushed deeper into hostile airspace. In the tail compartment, sealed off by glass and steel and cold, Staff Sergeant Michael "Mad Mike" Donovan watched as 12 Messerschmitt Bf 109 seconds slid into position. Out behind the bomber stream, they formed up with clinical precision, building their attack pattern like a knife aimed at the formation's spine. Regulations said, "Return to your station, cover your assigned arc, fire defensively." Training manuals said, "Hold your fire, save ammunition for high-probability shots." Common sense said, "Keep your head down and your body out of the line of fire." Donovan had no intention of obeying any of them. 4 minutes later, a dozen German fighters would be falling or burning, Hell's Fury would still be in the air, and a new word would spread through the 8th Air Force's tail section's aggression. This is the account of how one tail gunner's seemingly suicidal method overturned conventional air tactics, how desperation hardened into doctrine, and how the most vulnerable position on a B-7 became the most feared weapon it carried. Michael Donovan's war started long before he put on a uniform. He grew up in South Boston, where survival wasn't an idea, it was a daily calculation. His father worked the docks, loading cargo for men who never learned his name. His older brother fought in Golden Gloves tournaments, fists wrapped, nose broken more than once. In that world, waiting was how you got hurt. Striking first was how you got to walk away. By 17, Donovan had kept his own rough ledger. 32 fights in alleyways, stairwells, and street corners. He counted 4 losses. Every one, he knew, came from starting a heartbeat too late. When Pearl Harbor was attacked, the decision took him seconds. Donovan enlisted in the Army Air Forces. The system tried to send him to the ground crew, wrenches, oil, and concrete. He refused. He wanted the guns. At gunnery school, the instructors noticed him immediately. Too aggressive, too willing to expose himself in the mock setups, too inclined to lean into the line of fire if it meant a better angle. On the firing range, an instructor finally said what they all were thinking. "You're going to get yourself killed, Sergeant. You show too much. You're reckless." Donovan gave the answer that would echo around the school for years. "Dead gunners don't fire back, sir. Live ones do." He graduated 3rd in his class not because he was the best marksman on the charts, but because nobody acquired targets faster. While others tracked, confirmed, and calculated, Donovan was already on his second threat. His secret was brutally simple. He refused to wait for fighters to drift into his perfect firing cone. He treated the gun not as a shield, but as a hunting weapon. In March 1944, he was sent to the 390th Bombardment Group at Framlingham, England. The airfield was muddy, windswept, and crowded with men trying to finish their tour before numbers or luck ran out. Hell's Fury, the B-7 he was assigned to, had a history. 3 missions logged, 2 of them nearly ending in disaster under heavy German fighter attacks. The tail position carried its own story. The previous tail gunner, Sergeant Eddie Morrison, was alive, but barely willing to climb back into that compartment. Morrison asked for a transfer after the 3rd mission. To the crew chief, Sergeant Frank Murphy, he said only, "That spot's cursed. Next man back there doesn't make it home." When word spread that the tail position was opening, Donovan didn't hesitate. He stepped forward. Captain James Whitmore, Hell's Fury's pilot, decided to look this volunteer in the eye before signing off on him. "You know the odds back there?" Whitmore asked, hands in his flight jacket pockets. Tail gun positions got the highest casualty rate on the aircraft. 38% never finished their tour. "Then I've got 62% in my favor, sir," Donovan answered. "I'll take that." "Why?" Whitmore pressed. "What makes you think you'll beat those odds?" "Because I don't sit and wait for them to shoot at me," Donovan replied evenly. "I plan on shooting first." Whitmore studied him for a long moment, reading not just the confidence, but the absolute conviction behind it. Finally, he nodded once. "You're insane, Donovan. a thin smile. "You'll fit in just fine." Donovan's first mission with Hell's Fury came on March 2nd, 1944. Target: the ball-bearing works at Schweinfurt, a name that already meant hard flak and determined fighters to every crewman who'd flown before. He brought down one Bf-109, tore into two more. But what people talked about afterward wasn't the kill count. It was the way he fought. Standard tail gun doctrine was built on defense. Let the fighters close. Let them commit to their run. Open up only when they crossed into effective range. Conserve ammunition. Cover your bomber. Survive. Donovan ignored that playbook. He began firing short bursts at fighters still in the process of forming up streaks of tracers slashing across the sky well before the manual said to squeeze the trigger. It was wasteful by the book, foolish by the numbers. Those early bursts forced German pilots to break formation, to jink, to reset. His reasoning, offered later in the debriefing, was cold and clear. 20 rounds at 800 yards might not hit much, he said, but if it makes one fighter break off, that's 10,000 pounds of bomber and 9 men that don't get carved open. I'll buy that trade. 2 days later, March 4th, another mission, another industrial target, more German fighters. When a pack of Bf-109 seconds rolled in from 6 o'clock high, most gunners would have locked onto the lead aircraft, the obvious threat, the point of the spear. Donovan's sights went somewhere else. He ignored the leader and put his crosshairs on the wingman. The wingman was still sliding into place, holding a predictable relative position, not yet expecting to take fire. A perfect, stable target. Donovan opened up. The second fighter in the formation erupted, flame and metal peeling away. Deprived of his wingman, the lead pilot suddenly found himself alone, exposed. He broke off. The attack fell apart. Back on the ground, Sergeant Murphy did what crew chiefs always did after a rough mission. He checked the ammunition boxes. "You burned through 1,600 rounds," Murphy told him. "Standard load's 2,000. You spent 80% of your ammo on one sortie." "And we came back without taking hits in the tail," Donovan replied. "I'll make that exchange every time." But for Donovan, disruption wasn't enough. He'd spoiled attack runs, he'd scattered fighters, but he knew he hadn't yet reached the full potential of that narrow, freezing compartment at the end of the bomber. That night, in the dim light of the barracks, while other men wrote letters or tried to sleep, Donovan spread out whatever material he could find on German tactics, briefing notes, intelligence summaries, stories from crews that barely made it home. A pattern emerged. German fighters came in waves, 4 to 6 in echelon, sliding in from the rear quarter high. The lead aircraft drew the eye, soaked up the first bursts of defensive fire. The wingmen used that distraction, cutting in on slightly different angles, exploiting the gunner's tunnel vision. The American answer had always been the same. Track the lead threat, wait until the shot was good, fire only when you were sure of hits, preserve ammunition for follow-up passes. It made sense on paper, but in every diagram, every report, Donovan saw the same flaw. The bombers were always reacting. The fighters always chose the moment. Initiative timing, tempo, fear belonged to the attacker. He sat there, listening to the distant engines of returning aircraft, and asked himself a question almost no one else had put seriously on paper. What if that balance could be reversed? What if the gunner attacked while the enemy was still building his strike? What if a tail gun could force them to respond before a single cannon round left their barrels? March 6th, 1944. Pre-dawn briefing room at Framlingham. Cigarette smoke, cold air, maps pinned to the wall like targets. The objective was clear and brutal. The aircraft works at Augsburg. Intelligence laid out the stakes in clipped, tired voices, heavy flak, concentrated fighter defense, no illusions. 800 B-7s would cross the channel that morning. Intelligence estimated 2,500 German fighters available to meet them. Losses were not a question, only a number waiting to be filled in. Captain Whitmore gathered Hell's Fury's crew before they headed to the hard stand. "This one's going to hurt," he told them. "Stay sharp, stay alive. Do your jobs." At the back of the group, Donovan raised his hand. "Permission to change how we play this, sir." Whitmore eyed him. "Change what, exactly?" "I want clearance for aggressive fire," Donovan said. "Engage them before they start their attack runs. Force them to defend before they can go on offense." Whitmore shook his head. "You burn through ammo like that, you'll be empty before we even reach the target. Then what?" or I stop the real attack from ever forming, Donovan countered. Sir, we've been sitting on the defensive for 2 years. Tail gunner casualty rate is 38%. Whatever we're doing, it's not good enough. Maybe it's time we stop waiting for them to shoot first. Whitmore waited in silence. Then he gave him a single mission-sized window. You get 1 chance, Sergeant. 1. If we get torn apart, you're off that gun. Understand? Understood, sir, Donovan said. I won't waste it. They lifted off at 0647 hours. Engines droning at full power, wheels up, East Anglia dropping away beneath them. The bomber climbed, joined the formation over England, then turned for the continent, over the Channel. They passed into the familiar zone, where conversation faded and men settled into their routines. At 0824, they crossed into German airspace. Every gunner knew that, from this point on, the clock was running. For nearly an hour, nothing. Just contrails, the white lines of the formation stretching across a bright, bitter sky. Then, at 0919, the call came over intercom, flat but tense. Fighters, 6 o'clock high, 12 bandits. In the tail, Donovan swung his twin. 50 seconds into position. Through the glass, he saw them 12 BF 109 seconds, about 2,000 yards back, beginning to assemble into their attack pattern. Clean, practiced formation, a textbook rear assault in the making. Standard doctrine said, hold your fire, let them close. Engage the lead aircraft at effective range, somewhere inside 1,000 yards. Donovan squeezed the triggers at 2,000. The guns thundered. Long-range tracers arced out into the space where the German formation was forming, not where the manual said to shoot. Most rounds sailed wide, glowing lines fading in the distance. But the effect was instantaneous. The lead fighter jerked right, breaking formation. Wingmen hesitated, spacing dissolved, spacing that German doctrine relied on for coordinated fire. What had been a balanced pattern warped into a confused mess. Donovan, cease fire. Whitmore snapped over the intercom. You're throwing lead at empty sky. We need that ammo. Negative, sir, Donovan replied. Give it a minute. Watch what they do. Out beyond the tail, the BF 109 seconds tried to rebuild their formation, but now they closed more cautiously. No swift, aggressive dive. They probed, adjusted, circled. For the first time, they were reacting. Donovan tracked the new lead fighter and waited this time, letting it slide in to about 1,500 yards. Then he fired again, short, sharp bursts aimed not at precise destruction, but at pressure, at reminding them that the tail of Hell's Fury was not passive. The formation wobbled. Most followed their leader and backed off. One did not. On the left flank, a single BF 109 held course, no hesitation, no deviation. Donovan recognized the type instantly. Not a rookie, a veteran, the kind who trusted his training over his nerves. He won't scare easy, Donovan muttered to himself. Fine. He let the German come. 1,400 yards. Most gunners would start real firing runs soon. 1,200. The range where training hammered home the need to lay down serious fire. Donovan held his fire, watching the fighter grow in his sights. 1,100. 1,000. Now the cockpit and engine block filled the center of the glass. Then Donovan unleashed it. He poured 200 rounds into a sustained, concentrated stream in under 3 seconds. No probing bursts, no intimidation. Pure killing fire. The BF 109 tried to roll out, but the maneuver came too late. The fighter flew straight into the storm of tracers. The engine erupted, the airframe broke apart, and the aircraft disintegrated into black smoke and twisting metal. One bandit down, Donovan just nailed him, the radio operator shouted. Donovan didn't respond. His eyes were already moving. The remaining 11 fighters pulled back and regrouped. They had learned something critical in those few seconds. The tail of Hell's Fury was not just dangerous, it was actively hunting them. The German leader adapted. They split. 6 fighters swung into a new approach from dead 6 o'clock. The other 5 arced toward 7 o'clock, angling for a flanking attack to divide the bomber's guns. That split was a known tactic overload. The tail gunner's field of view forced him to try to cover too much at once, let something slip through. Donovan didn't fall for it. Waist gunners, 7 o'clock is yours, he called into the intercom. I'm locking down 6. In the waist, Sergeants Tommy Price and Carl Johnson brought their guns to bear, bracing for the oncoming 5. Donovan put everything on the 6 fighters coming straight in behind Hell's Fury. The lead attacker stabilized, lining up for his run. Donovan fired. The bursts walked into the German's path. The fighter vanished in a flash and a bloom of debris. For a fraction of a second, the remaining 5 broke their pattern, tightening, compressing as they reacted to the sudden loss. It was enough. Donovan shifted, reacquired the new lead aircraft, and fired again. Another burst, another hit, another explosion. The sky behind the bomber was now filled with smoke, shattered metal, and tumbling wreckage. Within 30 seconds, 3 BF-109 seconds were gone. The 9 remaining fighters broke away, not to set up for another pass, not to try a different vector. They disengaged completely, diving away, leaving Hell's Fury briefly alone. Inside the tail, Donovan ejected the spent belts, dragged fresh ammunition into place, and checked his remaining supply. He'd fired roughly 1,200 rounds already. 800 were left to see them through whatever came next. It was barely mid-mission. For 15 minutes, the sky stayed relatively clear. The formation pressed toward Augsburg, but the Germans were far from finished. When they came back, they came in force. This time, it was not 12 fighters, but 18, an entire staffel of BF-109 seconds, spreading out behind the bombers. They had seen what happened to the first group. They weren't going to commit to the same simple pattern. They broke into multiple angles of approach. 6 o'clock, 7, 5, 4. A layered attack designed so that no single gunner could cover everything, so that no one position could dominate the engagement. Standard doctrine in that moment demanded one thing: defensive coverage. Spread fire, try to keep everyone alive by touching every threat. Donovan rejected it. Waist, ball turret, you've got 4 and 5, he called. I'm holding the direct 6. Let them come. 6 BF-109 seconds rolled in straight from 6 o'clock, aiming right down the tail. Donovan did not try to dodge or shift erratically. He locked the sights on the lead machine and opened fire at what the manuals listed as maximum effective range, 1,200 yards. The closing speed between Hell's Fury and the oncoming fighters was roughly 400 knots. That meant about 7 seconds before the lead German reached true firing position. Donovan used every one of them. He walked the tracers up into the fighter's flight path, cutting off its future rather than chasing its present. To stay on target, the German pilot had to hold course, trusting that the incoming fire would miss. It didn't. At 800 yards, 50 caliber rounds slammed into the canopy and nose. The aircraft rolled inverted and toppled out of formation, trailing smoke and flame. 5 fighters left, 400 yards now, 3 seconds to lethal range. Donovan snapped his sights to the next attacker. There was no time for careful tracking. He fired not where the fighter was, but where it would be 2 seconds later based on closing speed and angle. The second BF-109 flew straight into the storm of bullets. The rounds tore through the engine cowling. The aircraft exploded in a bright orange fireball, scattering fragments across the air. The remaining 3 fighters broke formation at once. No attempt at a second, cleaner pass. They pulled away, abandoning their attack in full defensive flight. 2 more, in 3 seconds. Whitmore's voice came over the intercom, halfway between awe and disbelief. Jesus. Donovan. But Donovan was already working the belts again. He checked his boxes. One final ammunition run remained about 400 rounds. Enough, on paper, for 1 more heavy engagement or 2 shorter ones. Outside, the mission was only at its midpoint. Augsburg still lay ahead. The return flight lay beyond that, and somewhere between those 2 points, more German fighters would be waiting. For a while, the sky behind them stayed clear. The first and second waves had been beaten back, but nobody on Hell's Fury believed that was the end of it. The Luftwaffe didn't quit that easily. Soon enough, new shadows appeared on the horizon. German fighters began trailing the formation instead of charging straight in. 12 aircraft now, hanging just outside effective gun range, pacing the bombers like wolves, waiting for the right moment. Whitmore watched their movement, understanding the pattern even before anyone said it aloud. "They're not attacking," he said over the intercom. "They're stalling, calling in every fighter they can reach. When they come, it won't be in dribs and drabs. It'll be everything." He was right. 10 minutes later, Radar and visual sightings confirmed what the crew could already feel in their bones. More contacts, many more. 36 additional fighters, a mix of BF 109 seconds and FW 190 seconds. Together with the 12 shadowing them, that made 48 enemy fighters closing in on a single B-7 with a crew of 10. Standard procedure in such a scenario was straightforward and grim. Tighten up with nearby bombers, stack defensive fire, call for escorts, hope the P-51 seconds arrived in time. But Hell's Fury had drifted from the main box during the earlier engagements. The nearest friendly bomber was 3 miles off. No escort fighters were within reach. They were on their own. In the tail, Donovan checked his ammunition again. Roughly 380 rounds remained. Against 48 fighters, the numbers were absurd. Unless those numbers could be reshaped. "Captain," Donovan called calmly over the intercom, requesting permission to hit them before they're ready. Whitmore's reply came back clipped. "Spell it out." "They're building a big, coordinated strike," Donovan said. "Give them 2 minutes and they'll hit us from every angle at once. We won't be able to cover all those vectors. But right now, while they're still getting into position, they're exposed. If I hit the center of their formation early, I can blow up their timing, force them to scatter." "You'll empty those boxes in seconds," Whitmore warned. "Then what?" "Then we hope the time I buy is enough," Donovan said. "Sir, when you're outnumbered 20-1, sitting back and waiting for a fair fight is suicide. Our only shot is to punch them while they're organizing." There was a pause, 3 heavy seconds where the entire crew waited for the decision. "Do it," Whitmore finally said. "If you get us killed, I'm writing your family the angriest letter in the 8th Air Force." Donovan didn't waste another word. Out behind Hell's Fury, the German formation was sliding into attack geometry. Lead elements were setting approach angles. Trailing elements were slotting into support positions, counting on discipline and choreography to overwhelm a single bomber. Donovan opened fire. No cautious taps, no carefully measured bursts. He unleashed a full, sustained barrage at 2,000 yards, pouring 200 rounds into the airspace where the fighters were crossing paths and locking into formation. He wasn't aiming at individual aircraft. He was attacking the thin, invisible web that held the formation together. The effect was immediate and violent. Tracers ripped through the central cluster of German fighters. One BF 109 caught fire and spiraled away. 2 others, trying frantically to break and avoid the incoming hail, collided. Wings sheared, fuselages shattered, and both aircraft tumbled earthward. In an instant, the perfect, coherent strike force dissolved into chaos. Fighters pulled away in every direction, climbing, diving, scattering. Coordination was gone. The massive assault that had been forming now unraveled into 48 solitary pilots, struggling not to hit each other and not to fly into the tracer streams, cutting the sky apart. In the cockpit, Whitmore didn't bother finishing his exclamation. They all saw it. One tailgun, manned by a single sergeant, had just shattered the largest fighter concentration any of them had ever witnessed. Donovan knew better than to celebrate. He'd bought time. A minute, maybe 2, no more. And he had less than 200 rounds left. The Germans regrouped faster than he expected, 90 seconds. This time, they didn't try another carefully coordinated wave. They chose something cruder and far more dangerous, a swarm. 12 fighters dove from 6 o'clock at once, abandoning precise formation for sheer mass and speed. No subtlety, no angles, just a wall of guns rushing straight at the bomber's tail. Donovan didn't pick the closest or the first to fire. He aimed at the center of the cluster, the psychological heart of the group, the point where confidence concentrated. He fired 30-round bursts, 3 times in quick sequence, raking 3 different aircraft in the middle of the pack. All 3 took hits. 1 exploded, 2 peeled away trailing smoke. 9 fighters remained, still committed and closing fast. They were inside 400 yards now. 20-millimeter cannon fire lit the air. Tracers and shell bursts tore past the tail. Metal shrieked as rounds struck Hell's Fury. The aircraft shuddered but held together. Donovan didn't flinch. Target, burst, shift, burst, mechanical, rhythmic. Another BF 109 went down. Then another. Within seconds, 5 fighters remained, still boring in, still determined to finish the kill. At 200 yards knife fight distance, Donovan could see faces in cockpits. Young men, focused, trained professionals. There was no time to think about who they were, only what they were: threats. He cut into the swarm again. 2 more fighters blew apart under the combined stress of speed and 50 caliber impacts. 3 remained, and they were too close now. At 100 yards, collision risk spiked. The surviving pilots made a brutal calculation. The chance of ramming the bomber outweighed the odds of a clean firing run. They broke off, rolling and climbing away at the last instant. Donovan tracked one as it climbed. He squeezed the triggers. The guns clicked empty. No recoil, no thunder, just the hollow sound of dry metal. "I'm out," Donovan reported, his voice steady. "Tail guns are dry. No ammunition remaining." "Copy," Whitmore answered. "Damage report." One by one, the crew checked in. The ball turret had taken light hits. The rudder showed stress fractures. Hydraulic lines were damaged, but the Fortress could still fly. The engines were running. The wings held. The tail, however, was now a bluff. No bullets. No second chances. The Germans sensed it. They assembled one last time. 27 fighters remaining, from the original 48. They had already paid a staggering price. 21 aircraft lost to a single bomber. However, they also held a new advantage. The tail guns, their primary threat, were silent. This time, they chose the one vector the empty tail could not contest: 6 o'clock low. It was a classic execution approach, favored when you believed the defender had nothing left to throw at you. They came in tight, slow, deliberate. No rush, no wasted motion, planning to carve Hell's Fury apart from behind and below. In the rear compartment, Donovan watched them approach 400 yards, 300, 200. He had no ammunition, no way to actually fire. But he still had one weapon, everything they believed about him. He locked his guns on the lead fighter and tracked it with the same precision he'd used when his belts were full. No hesitation, no wandering aim, just cold, perfect alignment on the cockpit. Through his gun sight, he saw the German pilot's aircraft held rigid in attack position. He knew that pilot had heard the stories over the radio net. The tales of a tail gunner who wouldn't wait, who killed aggressively and without fear. The German's instincts took over. At the last instant, the lead pilot broke hard right, yanking himself off the attack line. He didn't know the guns were empty. He only knew that the barrels pointing straight at him had a reputation for killing. The rest of the formation followed, reacting not to reality but to their leader's fear. They splintered, breaking off their carefully staged execution approach without a single shot fired from the tail. "They're pulling out," the ball turret gunner shouted, disbelief in his voice. "They're actually leaving it." And they were. 27 fighters, already badly bloodied, scattered and did not return. They had lost too many aircraft, too many pilots, to one bomber and one gunner. Whatever their orders had been, the cost had become unacceptable. They turned back toward their bases, leaving Hell's Fury moving alone through hostile airspace with nothing but empty tail guns and a reputation that now protected it as well as any weapon. The bomber reached Augsburg, dropped its payload on the aircraft works, and turned for home. The return leg brought 3 more fighter contacts, but none of those German formations pressed an attack against Hell's Fury. Intercepted communications later suggested why. Somewhere in the Luftwaffe radio chatter, a warning circulated. One B-7 with a Madman on the tail had already destroyed an extraordinary number of fighters. The order was simple: avoid that aircraft. At 1,647 hours, 9 hours after takeoff, Hell's Fury touched back down at Framlingham. Donovan crawled out of the tail, unhit, hands steady. No visible shaking, no dramatic collapse, just a man who had done his job and was ready for the next one. Ground crew swarmed over the bomber, counting the scars. 47 bullet impacts, 13 cannon strikes, a severed hydraulic line, a cracked rudder, and still she had flown, fought, and come home. Sergeant Murphy climbed into the tail to inspect the gun station. He opened the ammo boxes. All empty. "You fired every last round," Murphy said when he found Donovan sitting on the tarmac, cigarette between his fingers. 2,000 rounds. "We loaded you to the limit and you used it all." "Didn't have any to spare," Donovan replied. "Not with what they threw at us." Captain Whitmore joined them with notes in his hand. "Crew reports, visual confirmations, intercepted German messages, and claims from escort fighters who had finally caught up near the target. 12 confirmed destroyed, Murphy said. 4 probably downed, 3 more damaged. Whitmore looked at Donovan. That's 12 you personally took out in one mission, he said quietly. 19, if you count the probables and damaged, Murphy added. And most of that in 4 minutes of real fighting. By evening, the story had outpaced the official paperwork. Word moved faster than ink. Across Framlingham, tail gunners were asking about Donovan's methods, about his timing, about how he'd turned the most vulnerable seat on a B-7 into a killing ground. By the next day, pilots from other bomb groups were showing up, asking for briefings. By that night, representatives from 8th Air Force Headquarters arrived, and with them, Major General Frederick Anderson, head of the 8th Bomber Command. He found Donovan not in an office, not basking in attention, but in the barracks, cleaning the same guns he'd emptied over Germany. Sergeant Donovan, Anderson introduced himself. I'm here to understand exactly what you did up there. Donovan laid it out without theatrics. Aggressive initiation of fire, targeting fighters in their formation phase, striking wingmen first, using sustained bursts to terrorize the center of a formation instead of merely clipping at its edges, exploiting the psychological collapse that followed a shattered attack. Anderson listened, expression unreadable. When Donovan finished, the general asked one question. Can you teach this to other men, not just how, but when and which men should learn it? Not everybody's built for it, Donovan answered. You need gunners who think like hunters, not sentries. Men who see opportunity where others see danger. You need people who are more afraid of doing nothing than they are of taking a risk. Find them, Anderson said. I'm authorizing a dedicated training program. You'll design the course, pick the candidates, and change tailgun tactics for the entire 8th Air Force. Effective immediately, you're being reassigned to training command. Donovan hesitated. Sir, I'd rather stay with my crew. Your crew doesn't need you anymore, Sergeant, Anderson replied bluntly. They're alive because of what you've already done. Other crews are dying because their gunners don't know what you know. So what matters more, a single bomber or thousands of them? The answer was obvious, and Donovan knew it. He accepted. Over the next weeks, and then months, he shaped what would be known as the Donovan Doctrine aggressive tail gunnery. Its core principles were straightforward, even if they cut clean against the habits of the time. First, seize the initiative. Do not wait for fighters to roll into attack runs. Hit them while they're building their approach, during the fragile moment when formation is still forming and discipline can still be broken. Second, weaponize psychology. The first burst doesn't have to kill. It has to frighten. Make the formation cautious. Make them doubt their plan. Hesitation is as much a wound as a bullet. Third, focus your fire. When outnumbered, stop trying to cover everything. Concentrate all your guns on the sector that poses the greatest threat and trust the rest of the crew to guard their arcs. Fourth, be aggressive to save ammunition. 30 rounds that break up 12 fighters before they can attack are worth more than 300 rounds fired at scattered targets once the assault is already underway. Preventing attacks is cheaper than surviving them. Fifth, accept personal risk to reduce overall loss. Tail gunners were already dying under defensive doctrine. Aggressive tactics might expose the gunner more, but they cut mission-wide casualties. The man in the tail was not the point. The bomber stream was. Reaction was immediate and divided. Traditional gunners branded the doctrine reckless. Officers worried about empty ammo boxes long before bombers reached their targets. Instructors who had spent years teaching conservation and patience labeled it outright suicidal. But the numbers began to shift. In March 1944, before the doctrine spread, tail gunner casualty rates in the 8th Air Force averaged about 38%. By June 1944, after aggressive fire patterns had been taught and adopted across multiple groups, that figure dropped to roughly 23%. Same missions, same enemy, different mindset, a 15% reduction in tail gunner casualties. And that was only one metric. Combat reports showed that in March 1944, German fighters successfully completed about 52% of their planned attack runs. By June, that completion rate had fallen to around 27%. Aggressive tail fire was ripping apart coordination before attack patterns could fully mature. German pilots began steering away from formations known to carry Donovan-trained gunners. Radio intercepts captured squadron leaders, cautioning their men avoid certain bomber groups, avoid certain tail positions. Donovan personally trained roughly 300 tail gunners between March and August 1944. Each class went through 2 weeks of relentless work, live fire, simulated attacks, mental conditioning. As much time was spent training minds as hands. His unofficial motto became part of the syllabus. Fear takes shape when you wait. Confidence grows when you act first. But not everyone could cross that line. Roughly 30% of candidates washed out. They couldn't shake their defensive instincts, couldn't accept the idea of inviting fire in order to control it, couldn't make peace with the risk that came with seizing initiative. Those who did adapt, however, changed the air war. By the end of the conflict, graduates of Donovan's program accounted for an estimated 43% of all tail gunner kills in the European theater. Some of them pushed the doctrine further than Donovan ever had, altering angles of fire, coordinating with waist and ball turret gunners for layered aggression, crafting variations adapted to different enemy tactics. One of them, Sergeant Thomas Bailey, was credited with 16 fighters destroyed in his first 4 missions. Another, Sergeant Robert Chen, flew 27 sorties without significant damage to his gun position. The point wasn't just destruction, it was deterrence. German training materials captured after the war told the other side of the story. By mid-1944, Luftwaffe manuals were warning pilots about American gunners who opened fire early, used sustained barrages, and aimed deliberately at the heart of formations. The recommended answer on paper was to avoid direct rear approaches and shift to high-angle dives from 11 or 1 o'clock. In practice, those alternative attacks required new skills and demanded their own kind of courage. Many German pilots were not eager to test them against bombers whose waist gunners had started copying Donovan's methods. By late summer 1944, German fighter effectiveness against American heavy bombers had fallen dramatically by some analyses, around 63% compared to early 1944 levels. There were many reasons. More escort fighters, improved bomber formations, strategic strangling of German fuel supplies. But internal Luftwaffe evaluations, written in the aftermath, credited roughly 28% of that drop directly to aggressive American gunner tactics. Donovan never saw those documents. He never saw most of the numbers. After the war, he went home to Boston. He picked up a construction job, built things instead of destroying them, and kept his stories to himself. When journalists tracked him down in the 1,960 seconds, hoping for a dramatic account of March 6, 1944, he turned them away. "I did what needed doing," he said. "So did a few hundred other gunners. That's all." He died in 1998 at the age of 76. His obituary in the Boston Globe mentioned his Distinguished Service Cross, his 16 years in construction, his wife Margaret and their 3 children. It mentioned that he had been a tail gunner in the 8th Air Force and developed new tactics. It did not list 12 confirmed kills in one mission. It did not mention 300 gunners trained. It did not tally the thousands of lives believed to have been spared when German pilots broke away rather than face aggressive guns. 17 people came to his funeral, mostly family. 2 men who had flown in the war. No honor guard, no volley of rifles. Just a quiet burial in Street Augustine Cemetery. The priest recited the rites without knowing what had happened in the skies over Germany half a century earlier. But the gunners knew. The night before, at a bar in South Boston, some of the men he had trained gathered informally. They lifted their glasses and remembered the man who had taught them that hiding behind their guns wasn't survival, it was surrender. Bailey, white-haired and 74 by then, spoke for all of them. "Mike never thought he was anything special," he said. "He figured he was just doing his job, but that job kept thousands of us breathing. Every bomber that made it back because German fighters lost their nerve. Every gunner who finished his tour because he learned to hit first instead of hoping to be missed. Every mission that succeeded because the enemy was too scared to commit. That's his legacy. Not 12 kills, 12,000 lives. The doctrine he helped forge didn't die with the B-17. Modern air combat training still teaches a version of it. Fighter pilots learn to engage early to disrupt enemy coordination. Crews on transport aircraft study how to project threat through fire patterns and posture. Even missile defense systems are built around the same fundamental idea. Meet the attack while it's still forming, not after it arrives. March 6, 1944, lasted 4 minutes in actual combat time. 1 tail gunner. 12 enemy fighters destroyed. A moment when defense stopped being passive and became a form of attack. When waiting was replaced by acting. When a kid from South Boston proved that survival in the air did not belong to the ones who hid, but to the ones who made their enemies afraid to get close. Michael Donovan fired 2,000 rounds that day, tore apart 12 aircraft, and, by conservative estimates, helped save thousands of aircrew lives across the campaign, not because he considered himself a hero, but because he refused to sit in that narrow glass turret and wait for death to arrive on its own terms. He went looking for it first. If this story touched you, consider hitting like and subscribe so more people can hear it. Tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. By remembering these men and speaking their names, we make sure their courage doesn't fade into silence. Thank you for keeping their stories alive.